Hi there, I'm Duncan. The aim of this course is to be clear about the good news of Jesus and what he means for our life. It's also designed for people who are thinking about getting baptised to help them get ready. To do that, we will explore the basic message of the Bible. We'll think about how that becomes real in our life and what it means to follow Jesus for the rest of our lives. So that's where we're going. When two people decide to get married, they begin to plan a wedding. There's a lot to think about, a lot to plan, and a lot to do. And for some people, the wedding can become all-consuming. And the big day comes round, and then it's gone again in a moment. The big deal about a wedding is not the day itself, it's the rest of life that comes after the wedding, living together as a married couple. When we think about becoming a Christian and getting baptised, the really big deal is our new life beyond baptism, living as a follower of Jesus. And if we're not interested in doing that, then baptism really means nothing. To explore what it means to become a follower of Jesus and to be a follower of Jesus, we need to turn to the Bible. When God wanted to explain himself and his wonderful ruined world and what he's doing to rescue it and how we can be rescued and how we can live as he intended us to live, he didn't give us a book of theology. He gave us a story, a true story. The Bible is God's story, and that story helps us understand him, and it helps us understand ourselves, and it helps us understand the world we live in. And so the challenge of being a follower of Jesus is not to try and fit God into our story. It's how to work out how to live our life in light of the great story that God is telling. God is the creator, and the world is his creation, and we are his creatures. We're a part of God's story. If there's ultimate meaning and purpose in the world, then it has to come from the one who created it, the one who's writing the story in the first place. And so the starting point is not us, the starting point is God. And the story that God's telling through the Bible is unfinished. It covers the past and the present, and it looks forward to the future. And it's told so that we can find ourselves in the middle of that story as characters in God's story. God has made many promises about the future in the Bible. And so the challenge is to work out how to live now in light of the story as a whole, how to play our part in the great story that God is telling. Now, a simple way to understand that great big story is to break it down into 7 chapters. And here are those 7 chapters. Chapter 1, creation, the wonderful world that God has made. Chapter 2 is the fall, how sin and evil came in and ruined God's wonderful world. Chapter 3 is Israel, how God explained his plan through the history of the nation of Israel. Chapter 4 is the Messiah, God himself coming in the person of Jesus to rescue us. Chapter 5 is the church, how Jesus' followers announced what he'd done to the whole world. Chapter 6 is judgment, how sin, evil and death will one day be thrown out of the world. And chapter 7 is the new creation, God's wonderful world becoming all that God intended it to be. So there's the story in 7 chapters, And in this story, we live in chapter 5, the church. And to get to grips with the story, it's helpful to see that it's actually told symmetrically around the centre. So chapters 1 and 7 are the world that God intended and that will one day finally be realised. This is the theme of God's wonderful world. Chapter 2 and 6 show how sin and evil came in, ruining the world, and how sin and evil will finally be thrown out of the world. This is the theme of God's ruined world. Chapters 3 to 5 show God revealing and announcing his plan through Israel and the church. This is the theme of God working through people. At the centre of the story in chapter 4, God came to rescue us in the person of Jesus. This is the theme of the Messiah. And so that is the basic outline of the story that we're going to use in this course. In the next 5 sessions, we'll look at chapters 1 and 7, the theme of God's wonderful world, and life as God meant it to be. In chapters 2 and 6, we'll look at the theme of God's ruined world, sin and judgment. In chapters 3 and 5, we'll look at the theme of God working through people, Israel and the church. And then we'll spend 2 sessions on chapter 4, the Messiah, and how Jesus rescues us from sin, evil and death. And that hopefully will clarify God's story, which is meant to shape and direct our lives. In the 3 sessions that follow on from that, we'll look at becoming a follower of Jesus, how we live our life in light of God's story. Then we'll look at how baptism marks our new life. And then finally we'll think about what it means to follow Jesus beyond baptism. And that will hopefully help us to see what it means to enter God's story and give us some idea about what that will mean for the rest of our lives. In this course, there are 2 aims. The first aim is that we understand God's story. The second aim is that we work out how that story should shape the reality of our daily life. We need to understand God, and we also need to be real about our own lives so that we can bring together the reality of our life with the reality of God's story. So that's where we're going to go in this course. In a moment, some questions will come up on the screen that you can discuss, and if you have a pack of the Solarium cards with you, you can look through them and use them to help you answer the questions.